This is the Venus of Willendorf. It's made out of limestone from about, they guess, this time period. So really, really long time ago. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but basically, let's just say Venus is a name that was added to it by the people who found it in reference to more Greek and Roman culture, which will happen way, 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 way after this. But they think of it as a Venus figurine in the sense of that it is a sort of goddess or idol type of thing, figurine maybe, as well as all about fertility. So we could say this is a fertility goddess. Um, it's small and it's handheld in the round. So in the round is fully able to see it on all sides. This brings up the idea for your project that it needs to be in the round. I'm going to show you various versions of figuration, and all of them, some of them are relief, but most of them are in the round. Just know that the examples are to show you different styles, not to have you do it in relief. You're doing this project in the round. So handheld in the round. Interesting subject matter. The face is missing. So it's all about fertility. And in this era of time, fertility is life, right? If your crops don't grow, if your herds stop producing, if you can't catch fish or kill an animal, hunting, gathering, then you can't live. And so there was a lot of their culture around about the ideas of fertility. Okay, going on to the Near East, 7000 BC. We're looking at this in a really quick manner, but the point is that for thousands and thousands of years, this sort of idea has been happening. This is also religious in nature. Jericho skulls. So they would have these skulls. This is actually using a human skull as the armature, and then building up over the top, and they have cowrie shell eyes. There's something about in this about ancestor worship, possibly, as well as capturing the likeness of the person. They're quite degraded because they're so old, but you get the idea here that they were capturing a piece, or maybe we could say in future terms, like the medieval era on, a relic of a person and an ancestor, and then sculpting their face back on. And they think probably for religious reasons about the afterlife, maybe ancestor worship, and maybe possibly something of like an idea of a portrait to remember people who have passed away and your lineage. And they found these and they would store them under their floorboards with other wealth in the ancient city of Jericho. So very interesting. What's the big theme here? Do I want you to take the head of someone you know, their skull, after they passed away and sculpt over it? No, that might be very creepy nowadays. But what I do want you to think about is the preservation of likeness as part of figuration. So we could say portraiture is a way of people living on after they've passed, as well as representation of them. Is it realistic? No, these aren't. But does it have to be realistic? And what does realistic really mean in terms of art? Well, we're going to talk about some of these type of terms in a little bit. The difference between figurative, realistic, abstract, some of those type of things to kind of break it down. The point is, though, I want you to think about the idea of what you sculpt maybe being something you want to save or something you care about. These are much different style, and I'm showing you different style. This is Sumerian, also the ancient Near East culture. What does it look like their eyes are? Very, very wide, because these are temple votive statues inside the temple. Votive means gift. And their eyes are open wide in front of divinity. So there's something to do about if they gave a gift of the statue or money, and the statue would be made for them. Every one of them, sometimes they're missing in a few of them because they're broken, have a cup in their hand, and so it's like an offering to the gods. Different style in the round. I show you this to think about another common idea is, where is it that you want to put this thing? These were made for a particular place, right? This was made to be held in the hand and moved around with the person. These are made to be standing in a particular place, a temple. So they have a sort of base on them, and it's been included and thought about as part of the sculpture. So you want to think about, how does this thing stand? Does it sit? Is it meant to just be in the hand in every which direction? Does it have a stand of some sort? Where does it go after it's made? Where's its home? Not just on your shelf, but conceptually, where do you want it to be seen as? Where is it located? Is it on the shelf? Is it by a book? Is it meant to go to a particular person? Is it supposed to be something you would want to put outside and you're making a model out of it? There's a lot of different things to think about with this. So I show you that also to show you the idea of stylization. So stylization is where something that would be organic is becoming geometric. And you can see that in the beards here and the kind of kilts that they're wearing. Another type of figuration here is seen with this guy called Naram Sin. This is called a stele. It's an upright slab of stone. It's depicting this narrative where he's defeated his enemies and he's wearing this kingly cap and he's coming before the gods, the mountain. He's showing himself to be the worthy king who's done the will of the gods and defeated his enemies. Well, do I want you to defeat enemies and take an empire? No. Do I want you to think about the type of things you have in your figure, the symbolism like this horned cap that he has? Yes. So I'm showing you that to think about another usage for sculpture. Of course, you're not going to, it's kind of, I'm being ironic and jokey. It's not that funny about the whole go on a rampage. But that's not the goal of it's stupid to even mention. Of course, you're not thinking that. The point is that to think about the type of symbolism you do with what you include in the imagery. Do you include other type of props that the animal figure is wearing or around? Is there like a feeling of a certain scene? Is there mythology involved in some way? Okay. This guy, seated statue of Buddha, he is a ancient Near East king. And these are temple plans. He was known for being peaceable, and he's got his hands grasped in like prayer or respect, and these on his lap are plans for a temple. So again, a religious sort of means, but also we could say propaganda. If he's making sculptures of himself, paying homage to the gods, making things for them, then in some way we're talking about the idea that sculpture is public propaganda, used to create a sort of image of people and ideas of things, very much like this, a propaganda piece to show people a narrative. Well, you're going to construct a narrative in your sculpture. When you make something that's figurative, there's a lot of associations people are going to have with it. And we're going to have to think about what type of associations are there that you don't know about. And if you don't know about them, maybe you need to become aware of them and control the narrative a bit more rather than just make something random, right? So that's something interesting to think about. Also, there's a common theme here in seated statuary that has figures on it. You can think about The Thinker by Rodin. You can think about this. You'll look at a piece, we're going to look at a piece of ancient Egyptian art. So there's a common trope of a seated figure. Gives them power, kingliness sometimes, a lot of different things. But humanistically, like with Rodin thinking, there's a lot of different kind of connotations depending on the pose. But that's one way to think about what is your figure doing? In action, standing, are they seated? Are they basic shape? Do they have more detail? Think about that action here with the bison. These ones feeling very still. Okay. This is interesting piece, not in 3D, so you're not going to do it in relief, but it's called the Palette of Narmer. And it's a narrative about Egypt and the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt into one place, one kingdom. And this guy in the smiting pose is Narmer with a mace and this bullprint crown, which later becomes the double crown over here, is a whole big narrative about how he is meant to be the king of Egypt and unify it. These are like animals that are unifying, that are very interesting in mythology. And goes all through. The point is, though, that I want to show you also, there's conventions of style in ancient Egypt, and each of these eras had sort of conventions of style. What do I mean? Well, see how all the men are bearded. See how all the eyes, except for the monk-like figure, see how the eyes are open wide in all the people? See how they're wearing common sort of style of kilt? Well, this has a twisted perspective. There's hierarchical scale, things that are bigger or more important, smaller or less important. He's holding his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. He's got the certain type of kilt. He's got the frontal eye on the side of his head, front torso. This is that twisted or composite view of the human. So you're going to think about all these type of things as styles that you're going to do. Does it need to be realistic, fully real? No, it can be representational but not real, and we'll talk more about that. We've got a few things in relationship to that. But I want you to see that right now, that many of the things I'm showing you are not hyper real, but they're still figurative. So another seated statue sculpture. This one is of Khafre, the builder of the big Great Pyramid in ancient Egypt, Gaza. This is actually a serdab, so it's actually functioned to hold his ka, his soul, and really important for them with their whole beliefs in mummification and their afterlife. It shows him in power. He would have had some kind of nub of a scepter or some kind of. He's very powerfully seated like this guy, but he's got more maybe intensity in that he's holding something. Intensity is the wrong word. He's more than just hands grasped. He's got on his back Horus, which is a god, supporting him. He's got his throne. He's very much in a tranquil repose, but very, very much a power kind of stance. Seated figures, a power position, not stance. He's not standing. So you get the idea here. Different things that are stylistic to them: the fake beard, the headdress, all the type of symbols. Ancient Egypt as well, seated scribe. This is also probably a serdab made out of limestone painted. It's a scribe. He's in the position of his labor and work. He does not have as much of a formality to him and rules because he's a lower class person, more naturalistic, more looking like the guy probably. This being more of a idealized version of power in a person. And he's doing his job. So, in the act of doing what's important to him as his job and his position, back then, scribes had quite a lot of power. There weren't a lot of people who could necessarily read and write. The masses were not literate. And so this was something he was very proud of, I'm sure, and made his living off of. And so his thing is part of an action or a job. So something to think about there as well. Ancient Cyclotic idol. We're looking at something from the Aegean. That's in Europe, the south by Greece, and the different islands around there. This cannot stand. It was meant to be processional. So in this way, we're kind of going back to something that has more similarity to this, albeit very different style. And we're looking at something that's meant to be a processional, maybe an idol, also possibly part of burial, like it's laying down in burial, broken up in thirds, sort of naturalistic knees, but all very, very geometric, probably originally painted eyes. And we're looking at something that was maybe a fertility goddess, similar type of focus on the pubic triangle and breasts and things, but also possibly about death and coming back into the afterlife. So something interesting going on there with that for these people, interesting for them. Ancient Greece. Now, we're getting into the idea of humanism and that man becomes more of the measure of all things rather than the gods in ancient Greece. And it's a change in viewpoint. And because of that, we're starting to get depictions of people who are, in ancient Greece especially, later it becomes more history, but early on with them, it's about the ideal person, warrior, athlete, hero. They got a braid on their head because of that. And this stance is like the ancient Egyptian stance, so they learn from the ancient Egyptians. But think about the pose of the body as part of what you're communicating. Different poses communicate different things, right? This guy is posed in such a way as he's doing his work as a scribe. She's holding up snakes because she's the mistress of the beasts. This minotaur is sort of somewhat in anguish or a position of kind of potentially turning towards something, kind of read the body language to be speaking something. This is very blocky, but still, it's stepping forward in a sort of power stance, right? This sculpture. Not just women depicted in ancient times as goddesses, but this is People's Kore, named after her belted dress. This right here. Kore, if you see this was Kyros, Kore being the ideal female. She's got the archaic smile, so does the other guy, so sort of happiness. Missing one of their hands, but you're getting into the same type of thing, an idealized version, stylized hair, representing something that's humanistic, the idealized person to attain or go towards as a cultural. I guess you could say in some way this is equally propaganda as much as this or this. This has a sort of type of propaganda in that it's representing a worldview that's trying to have culture attain to. This is called Zeus or Poseidon, also ancient Greek bronze sculpture. This is Zeus or Poseidon depending on what would have been in his hand. If it was a lightning bolt, Zeus, a trident, Poseidon. But he's in action. So we have these ones that are very still, holding their hands to their sides, still power stance. Think about the action that the person might be taking, or the animal, right? We've got different versions like we've been talking about way back here. The animal is licking the insect bite or wound. This is a god who's about ready to throw some type of power device, right? So we're getting different type of things, and we feel the musculature. This is getting way more anatomically correct than a lot of things we've looked at. And so you can go this route if you want to. I'm fine with that. And have a mix of stylization in the beard and hair. If you want to really try to do the human figure realistically, I'm fine with that. I'm not necessarily personally in my art always interested in that, but I can appreciate it, and so it's fine. My example I make probably won't be trying to go this direction. I've never been one to really be too concerned about super realistic human sculpture for my own work, but nonetheless I think it's very interesting. This is Hellenistic ancient Greece. You're getting the rules that they built up over time in archaic and then classical, and then Hellenistic they're beginning to break them. This is the head of a particular person, so we're getting something of history coming in here, mixed with sort of still an idealization of that person. He's turning away, has more emotion in his face, still some stylization. Alexander the Great being one of the most important rulers of the ancient world and created a giant empire that Hellenized or changed much of the ancient world and brought Greek all over the place. So very important historical figure. Also ancient Greek. This is Laocoon marble made about a myth. So this is the priest and his sons who tried to warn Troy about the Trojan Horse, or uncover the plot from Homer's Odyssey or Iliad. Which one is it? I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, the Trojan Horse is a gift. It comes with that idea, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, is an actual phrase people talk about back in ancient classical literature. Well, they brought the horse into the city, and then at night they came out and destroyed the city. It's what computer viruses are named after. These are the guys who tried to expose the ruse, and so they got attacked by sea serpents, as in they were going against the will of the gods, so the gods killed them type of idea happening here. Also Hellenistic, way more emotion and movement in the piece. So is there a combination of human and animal in your piece? Is there some way in which there's a relationship between nature and your figure, if you want to put human and animal? Or is there just an animal doing something that's symbolic or standing in for a person? So thinking about this type of stuff, and you think, oh, yeah, right, okay, also not how we think about the world nowadays. Well, I'll give you this idea to wrestle with here. What do you think all of these graphic novels, cartoons, Mickey Mouse, go down the list of animals with human characteristics, or humans with animal characteristics, all this type of stuff. Supernatural type of abilities in our Marvel comics. I mean, there's a lot of this type of stuff in our culture. We just have it under the guise of different types of fiction and things like that. Well, maybe it was a little bit fictional for them too. Maybe they believed it. Maybe it was a moral tale to say, don't go against something like power structures. Maybe they believed it actually happened. You know, it's all kind of we don't know exactly, and maybe it was dependent upon the person. We do know that it was important in their mythology, just like nowadays, in our postmodern world, a lot of people develop their own mythologies that are very important to them. See Star Wars as an example, right? So think about what you're making and how it relates to you and what you care about. Nike, also known as a winged victory. This is a very, very beautiful piece. I've seen it in person. It's in the British Museum. It's as if she's descending down from the heavens / on the prow of a boat. It's supposed to be like the wind is whipping and pressing onto her body. So you see some of the form of her breasts and things popping through her garment because of that. And winged mean like because she's like a goddess or related to Athena. It's meant to be on the, or was on the prow of a ship originally when it was found, a sculptural piece on the prow of a ship. So it's relation to victory, naval battle, and all these type of things. But a lot of really, really fine carving and detail in the garment and the wings, and they're very anatomically correct compared to a lot of things we've seen as well once we've gotten to ancient Greece. So think about the situation. Are you seeing something in action? Are you seeing something as it's happening, or are you seeing something just depicting? Important piece in ancient Rome. Looking here at Rome for a couple slides. This is Augustus of Prima Porta. That was where it was found. He's in this act of oration, like a speech making, and he's having this idea of he's a conquering general. He's wearing military garb. He's in a contrapposto pose. This is ancient Greece and also ancient Rome. We haven't shown you one yet, so this is the first example. It's where your weight is on one leg, and then you have this bending. The hips go like this. Classical pose for figure, contrapposto. He would have had a baton of power right here. It's missing, but power symbols, oration, definitely imperial propaganda, as well as the fact that we have creepy little Cupid down here riding the dolphin, which is symbols of Venus. So he was trying to say that he was related to Venus or like a god and meant to be in power, divine right of kings sort of idea happening here. And Cupid being the offspring of Venus. So he's saying he's a part of that lineage and he's a powerful conquering general, warrior sort of idea. So think about the messaging. I mean, I'm not saying that you should make propaganda, but think about what you're making and what the message is. Another Roman piece, and the first of historically considered the type that all equestrian portraits are made off of. Equestrian being horse. So a person on their horse. This is Marcus Aurelius. He was also an emperor, one of the ones considered to be a good emperor. He's got his hand in a sort of oratory pose, or people think the idea of him actually staying punishment, saying, no, don't hurt somebody. So He was a philosophical emperor. He wrote an important book called Meditations that you can still read today, History of Philosophy. Um, so this is from a long time ago as well. It's in bronze and he's on a horse, so a power symbol. He's showing himself in a different way. If you see his hair, he's bearded on his face. He has a beard, whereas Augustus was clean shaven, but the hair is similar. That is because Greek philosophers had beards, and he considered himself a philosopher. So even though he was Roman, he wore a beard in that fashion. So this is interesting to point out. I'm pointing it out because of the type of things you show on a figure, animal, body, clothing will communicate as symbols certain type of message about the person or the story you're creating. And very much here with the horse, this is like a very much imperial piece, and it was shown in Rome in a power position, so he's being shown in a particular way, propaganda as well. Different propaganda than this guy. He's not trying to say he's a god, but still propaganda nonetheless. Another piece from ancient Rome, this is popular to have a bust. So a lot of things I've been showing you have been the full figure. Okay? I want to suggest to you that you can also do what is called a bust. Head and shoulders, not the shampoo, but a bust. Way to remember it. The head down to the shoulders. This is a young Flavian woman, 25 inches, so about 2 feet. Really, really a lot of detail here. And it's a portrait, right? There's an idea in ancient Rome where the family, super important, paterfamilia. And so capturing these, and this was a fashionable thing for high society ladies to do with these, show themselves in these fancy hairdos, and to capture the family likeness. So we have a lot of that stuff going on. You can go this realistic if you want. This is getting into, yes, it's a bit idealized form of beauty, but we're getting into pretty realism here. And all of these pieces getting closer to realism, not just naturalism. So you can go that direction with this if you want. Here's a piece of a really, really giant statue of Constantine. He was the emperor who moved the capital of Rome from the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to a city he named Constantinople after himself, but also is now called Istanbul. So modern day Istanbul in Turkey. Kind of a figure in history that had changed a lot of things about the Roman Empire and kind of a direction of the world, in the sense that he created the Edict of Milan in 323 that legalized Christianity in the empire. And he has the idea of him being a Christian emperor, and his eyes are wide open sort of idea. But he's also very much in this giant statue. This is really, really large head, trying to show his immense power and that he's a worthy successor to the ancient Roman emperors. He was an emperor who became emperor from war and being successful in military conduct. So different ideas going on here. And kind of similar to Rome, the earlier Roman stuff, but different. The start of what you would consider Byzantium, which is a Christian Roman Empire in the east. This is Charlemagne, is a really important king emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He was crowned in 870. We're going a lot further forward into AD by Pope Leo III to be the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So we're getting something kind of coming off from Constantine. Much later, legalizing Christianity 500 and some odd years later, an idea of a new empire that was Germanic, but considered this. He's got an equestrian portrait going on, so he's considering himself a worthy successor of Marcus Aurelius. He's pulling on that idea by doing an equestrian portrait. He's got the orb of power. He would have had maybe a sword in his other hand. He's got a crown on his head, gilding on him that's missing. So very, very much, it's only 9.5 inches, but very, very much a stylized, but still showing something of his actual likeness. We have coins from his era that have him depicted somewhat similarly. So it's becoming a little simplified, and there's a continuum of abstraction from hyper-realism down to like non-objective or non-representational art. Well, this is not like hyper-realistic, but it's representational, and the autonomy is not far off from realism. Like, it feels pretty accurate, but it's not going for as much realism as our young Flavian woman. So think about the level you want to land at and where that's going and why. Maybe not just do it because I just want to do it. Oh, I didn't think about it. Okay. In medieval Romanesque era, we begin, and even in this era of the early medieval, we have what they call reliquary statues and reliquaries, which hold the piece of a sacred person, or not sacred, holy person, sometimes a saint or different people, usually always a saint, I should say. Not all of reliquaries throughout the world are only Christian. There's other cultures and people that use them, but in Western art, most of them are Christian. This has the skull of the saint inside of it and other things. This holds the relic as well. It's over a wooden core, and it's made out of gold and jewels. So relics were very important in this time as penance and also connection to things holy. So they put them in special boxes, or in this case, a statue that acts as a sort of holder, a reliquary for the relic. So this is an interesting way to think about this idea. Does it have a purpose beyond just looking aesthetically interesting? Is it connected to an idea? Are you trying to make something for somebody to use in some way, or for yourself to use? So depictions of historical narratives. We had something of history happening here. A defeat and a battle scene, I meant to say. There's an actual war scene being shown on this where someone is giving up something to a person who could stand in for the Roman army or Augustus or their god of war. Well, we have another idea here of depicting a narrative or story that many people believe to be historically accurate or have actually happened, which is Joseph and Mary from the Bible with Jesus going into Egypt, depicting the flight into Egypt. Made by Gizalbertus in the 12th century, one of the only sculptors from this era that we actually know his name. It's got his sort of style. This is his style over here as well. And he's using symbolism like halos over Mary's head because she's a saint. A lot of other things like geometric stylization. This was meant to be the top of a column called a capital, and it was used in that way. This is Joseph. And there's a lot of stylization mixed in with some amount of naturalism. So you can think about that, how you want to do that. They call this version of Christ like he's a miniature man, even though he's, supposed to be very young. And this is Gizalbertus over here showing something, a narrative from the Bible that has yet to happen, this last judgment. And so there's different ways. He is very stylistic. He uses a stylization in the way he uses fabric. It's like geometric and zigzaggy. So think about what kind of narratives you might be telling. Does this have something to do with what you believe in some way? What kinds of symbolism you put around the figure? Does it all have to be hyper realistic? Can you use an animal with a person? Are there other types of things, plant life, material that are part of the story? Last thing I'm going to show you from ancient times is from the portal of a cathedral. So the portal is the big door that you go into in a cathedral. And these often would show a lot of different figures. And there were saints and biblical figures that were shown in ancient times. I want to show you this because it's a different style than here. But also, they're all turning toward each other to suggest to you maybe you show more than one person. So a few people or one or two people together creating a conversation. And when you have more than one person, there's an idea of exchange and dialogue happening. So thinking about that type of idea, when you have more than one person, there's a different type of narrative happening. You don't have to do that, but you could do that. Don't go crazy and do so many that you lose track of time, and also don't put enough detail into what you're doing and end up with poor craftsmanship. But thinking about that could be really interesting. Refiguration, representational figure, and different versions of that aren't necessarily different materials from before. Some of them will be bronze or metal, or different things like that, but they have much different themes, and they're using a lot of different stylizations, and they're pulling in different references, things that are from now, postmodern, modern world that we live in. This piece is called Silver Moon. It's an edition, a cast edition by an artist. A lot of the people I'm going to show you in the slideshow make art that's pretty sellable and sells all over the world. It's called blue chip. It rises in value despite the fact that the economy goes up and down. Why am I showing you that type of art? Partially because a lot of it is figurative, and because I think it's interesting for you to think about art that sells now and how it gets disseminated and looking at it. So kind of getting your mind thinking about contemporary art. This artist, Chris O'Feely, is a Turner Prize winning. He was an artist from the Young British Artists, YBAs. If you've ever taken contemporary art history, you understand a little bit about that. He draws inspiration from an eclectic range, and he's oftentimes known for his paintings. He does a lot of painting, but he has done some sculpture. Religious sources from the Bible, William Blake, blaxploitation films, hip hop, and he was Nigerian. He is Nigerian, so he draws from that. He has large scale paintings that combine like ripples, dots, and things, and he's got a couple pieces that are pretty controversial. If you with the Virgin Mary, so if you Google him, be prepared for some of that to come up. A piece that was removed because of he had themes that were pretty intense. So, but this is sort of still coming out of the same ideas of showing versions of people that are different from the classical Western art perspective, in that he's showing African, Nigerian themes, things that are often, I guess, excluded from Western art history. So he's very concerned with that type of stuff. That's interesting. This is a guy named Hank Willis Thomas, and he did work on a whole series of these from a show called The Beautiful Game about soccer. If you're into soccer and football, you'll know about this term, hand of God. It's a very what shall we say, important moment in the history of football, soccer, about a whole drama that happened where someone used their hand to block a ball from going into the goal. And so he's capturing a moment of that. I believe it was Diego Maradona, but all of a sudden my mind is going blank on that. But he's a conceptually based artist. He does stuff across sculpture, photography, installation, where an entire room becomes a piece of art, and he even does some performance art. This kind of piece explores the intersection of art, sports, and geopolitics, and how they're kind of thought about differently, but in fact they have overlap. And he says, in particular, to the ideas of nationalism, colonialism, and the kind of nature of humans to disagree with each other throughout world and history, and how, in a way, a game can become a metaphor and a type of battlefield of art, a battlefield of culture and history and art. He's bringing art into it as part of that with propaganda, but it's a proxy for war, basically. And so he's bringing in ideas like that throughout this whole body of work. So interesting. Also want to point out here, figurative could be a particular part of the body. We've had the bust, which is the head and shoulders. Now we have a piece which is an arm and a ball. So don't have to necessarily do the full figure. Also interesting here, we got a seated figure again, so a trope that shows up time and time again. Okay, so moving on from him onto another artist, Katsura Funkushia. That's, I butchered that name really badly. Words like a tower. It's actually wood, marble, and brass and bronze, mixture of different things. She makes whimsical figurative sculptures that connect with the physical and the metaphysical. So she uses other type of imagery to bring in metaphysical ideas, personifications of that. She carves them from wood, and also brings in other materials. They have a sort of surreal quality to them, and they're kind of like totems for the bond between the mind and the body. So the idea of our head and how we're thinking. If you see this over here, there's like sort of an idea of a house and all the thoughts over the figure. I could say this has a really, 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 really strong connection, even though maybe people don't say it, to our snake goddess. She's holding animals. There's a sort of house over her with the cat. Her breasts are exposed. She's a female from ancient history. Well, we have a female from now, breast exposed, sort of head house-like structure of her head with different animals and things that represent metaphysical ideas. So not that much different in a way. Very, very different style and different, but not necessarily so different. She says as a quote, "When something happens, I can see lots of things which stand up from one's shoulders, just like an aura and a rainbow, orbiting above one's head and sinking into the other side." So the idea of thinking and things happening. Not all of her pieces have that floating over the head. This is another piece. Pendulum above the water. Definitely stylized feeling of humans. I see in her work quite a bit of an influence of maybe the way figures treated in something like Giselbertus. I bet she wouldn't say that, but or maybe even the simplification of Charlemagne sort of happening here. I mean, it's not super direct, but there's some kind of feeling of that for me. Another piece, another artisan piece that's interesting, Giacometti. This is he was a key player in the Surrealist art movement, but his work resists easy categorization. Some people say it's more formalist, others argue it's expressionist, and there's all kinds of argument. We won't get into all that. But eventually he kind of was excommunicated from the Surreal group because his intentions of sculpturing was different than what they thought should be. It was more of an expression of emotional response to the subject, and they didn't like that because they were dealing with dreams and all kinds of things. He didn't necessarily agree with them, but he attempted to create renditions of models the way he saw them, and they thought they ought to be seen. He said he was sculpting not from the human figure, but the shadow that is cast. So I don't think we could say he's actually, people say that he's actually trying to see the way he saw them. I don't think we mean the way he saw them in that he was measuring their bodies and making them to look realistic, but in some way trying to capture their essence. In some of his work, he had a pretty intense traumatic experience of death when he witnessed his friend die in a trip to Italy, and then in 1921, and this is much later. So in some way, in 1960, this piece is, people say that from then on, all of his work in some explicit or not as explicit way has a way in which he is kind of dealing with that, describing the feeling of death through living or moving and walking forward. You could think about that might be part of this. A couple pieces by Luis Kruger. This is called Man Polychrome Pine, so it's made out of wood, from 1955. Older piece than some of the other things we just started looking at. She had an art academy education, but she was also trained in shipbuilding, metalworking, and woodblock printing. So that's interesting. She had her education that accounts for part of her blocky aesthetic and her preference for wood and bronze. So her kind of aesthetic is based on her craft education and the type of materials she works with. She's inspired by folk art and craft. So there's a lot of work. Folk art is thinking about outsider art, people who aren't necessarily trained as artists. So she had the academy art education. She was trained as an artist, but she's inspired by people who work outside of that folk art and kind of bringing in their aesthetic into the work that she makes. She also works in embroidery and patchwork, but these sculptures of humans and animals are her most well-known ones. She has a really simplified approach to depicting the body's gestures and the figure, and I think I really enjoy it in a lot of ways. Um, and I think the subtleness is really beautiful in a way in her work and the kind of geometry mixed into it. This guy is more. He was born in 1982. It's 2015, so pretty contemporary, not that long ago. He's born from Iraqi parents in Rome, and he grew up between Rome, Florence, the Netherlands, and Antwerp, so all over Europe. He moved around to a lot of countries, and it kind of reinforced his idea that belonging went beyond geographic borders, and that kind of acted as a framework to his work, but also his desire to outline common human experiences. So when he was growing up, he saw images of the Gulf War, suffering and violence became sort of this idea in his head, inevitability, and being from Iraqi parents. So he's kind of dealing with that difficulty. But then at the same time, he grew up in Florence and Rome and had these ideas of beauty and classical sculpture and even the material of marble going there. So he's kind of contrasting these things of grotesqueness with that. And there's some way in which he's kind of almost remaking ancient sculptures that have been broken, right? So if you think about the way we looked at something, now it's been a little bit ago, how these have been degraded and broken down. They weren't like this originally, but over time, well, he's kind of making them like that right off the bat, so to speak. Like a wear that's happened to them. Okay, so that's interesting. Another artist I want to talk about for a second. He is from New Zealand. He is from this is from 2015. He works and lives in New Zealand. He's a professor there, I believe, in Auckland. He makes a variety of work as well: sculpture, photography, different types of things. And he kind of plays a lot with originality, authenticity, and ownership. He blurs things between things, and he likes this idea of translation and weaving between what is considered high art and not high art, things that are mass produced. Um, and then he deals a lot with things that are basically have a high gloss, high production value thematically, but also he likes to critique colonialism a lot. He has a way of sneaking up on you, they say. He has things that make you think, oh, it's just one exact way, and then you start looking at it and thinking about it a bit more, and there's a lot of politics beneath the surface of his factory finishes. So they're beautifully made, but they also have a slyness to them, is the idea. You see, okay, well, what's this guy? A guy with a suitcase, umbrella. He looks like a businessman, maybe from London. You start unpacking it a little bit more. It's very slickly finished. It's on the wall, and it looks like a Magritte painting in a way. The kind of things that Magritte does, which is a surrealist. Well, where is New Zealand? Way down by Australia, right? And it was colonialized by the British. So there's something here that he's probably starting to talk about as he's a native. He's from a tribe that's native to New Zealand, talking about that type of idea of colonialism, all while also being just a kind of slickly made nice piece out of polyurethane cast resin and automotive paint really finely. This is a work made by a duo. It's called Homotesco Metro. You know, Homosapien is person. Tesco is in England, they're British, a big shopping like Walmart, and Metro being city. So they produce objects as a duo when they do deals directly with political, social, and historical issues by using a mix of eclectical references. Well, this one probably for sure is dealing with the idea of shopping and the way in which people are throwing things away, right? They have a garbage can with a skeleton on it holding their hands. So very, very, very strong ideas about commercialism and commercial concerns and how people behave and what they believe in the way they work in the world, right? Sumo ergo sum. I shop, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. Common idea of Descartes, right, in philosophy. These are all kind of mixed up words from Latin and things they're messing around with. But look, a purse, shopping bags, credit cards, littered things, death. I mean, this is really political, not like subtle at all. I'm really trying to hit you in the face with it. So you can go that route, make commentary about social things. That's a really important way of thinking about working too. You know, human experience, human emotion, political things like colonialism, political things like critique of commercialism, war, beauty, depiction, outside, what is art, all kinds of ways of working. Tom Friedman, this is a small version, and this was made into a public artwork. He is an American also, stainless steel. This one and that one. He's got a really, really, really wide range of things he works with, inventive and idiosyncratic. He uses styrofoam, foil, paper, clay, wire, plastic, hair, and fuzz. If you see here, these look like they're made out of foil, even though they're stainless steel. Well, he probably originally made a piece out of foil, made a mold of it, had it cast small size stainless steel, and then eventually made into a public artwork. I think it's in Texas, if I remember correctly, outside of a football stadium complex. So the idea of a huddle, coming together as a team, rugby huddle, football huddle, all those things. He likes to work in a painstaking, labor-intensive methods to create things from life. In each piece, it says he pays obsessive attention to detail and the idea of replication. Well, in some of his other work, that would be even more true. This is how he usually replicates things like video cameras and wood and paint. This is made out of wood and made primer gray. What's the replication here is almost like a replication of his own sculpture, and it feels like aluminum foil. So there is that sort of thing there, but it's hiding it a little bit. He likes to think about things, make things from everyday life in order to make people think about things they haven't thought about, or to think in a new way. This piece is probably deviating a bit from his normal work, but nonetheless, still the idea of foil and somebody huddling together and teamwork is all kind of happening in an interesting way. I want to look at, this is the plastic soldier one. I want to look at a project called Boy the Frog. It's at the Getty, but there's another version of it somewhere in Venice as well. It's a pretty large scale version of a boy holding a frog like this. So this is the close-up of the face, but I want to show you an article about how it was made as well. So hold for a second while I pull up that website. This is from the Getty's blog, where this is located, and it shows you some images of how they made it. This is when it was still wrapped up in its installation. And it's kind of interesting. This artist works with a founder, this place called Handmade Facility of Art Fabricators. So he works with fabricators, which is common for large objects that are in public spaces, public art. He had this idea of a boy holding a frog, and he took some pictures, and then they made 3D digital models. And he became like a Renaissance sculptor, but used 3D modeling software that had a haptic interface. You could respond to touch. And it's even used for dental surgery. After that, they printed off versions of it in urethane foam, different sizes, and they could kind of decide on the scale and other little details. Pretty interesting. And then his team of fabricators from that place made molds, and then they created the final out of the pattern to create sculptures out of fiberglass and steel. So that's out of the urethane. If you look at it from the outside, you can see below that fiberglass layer, which is like a resin layered and layered with mesh in it to keep it strong. It's a 1/4 inch thick, and it's got like a really fine paint job over the top. Is a stainless steel armature. So in essence, he made a giant version of what you're going to be doing with oil clay, a stainless steel armature, and then he put a hollow, rigid thing over the top of it, rather than something that's moldable like your oil clay. People do this a lot with stainless steel. Even their bronze sculptures will be an armature inside of it like this if it's really large. It runs all the way down the feet. This is the fiberglass version installed at the Getty. It was completed in 2008, and there's another one that's been put in. This is it. I don't know how to say that museum. That's in Italy, in Venice, which is now in stainless steel. So that's pretty amazing. The main difference between the two, besides where they are, is the stainless steel one is a lot heavier. Shows you the kind of detail that they made. This is an interesting artwork because it's using like new technologies mixed with like old concerns, and keeping it white makes the idea of like ancient Greek art that used to be painted, but now because it's white and the Romans remade it white too, it's become an aesthetic that's associated with classic work and neoclassicism. And so by doing it, he's kind of tying into those ideas as well. So that's pretty interesting stuff. So that's Boy with Frog.